Okay, so good evening. Gemar Tov to everyone. It's Motzi Yom Kippur. Glad to be continuing our learning of the daf together. Let me share my screen and we will get started. Today's daf is daf Yud Chet of Masechet Zevachim. We are in the middle of Yud Zayin Amabet at the two dots by Mechusar Begadim. And so our opening Mishnah in the second chapter of Zvachim listed a series of individuals who invalidate a sacrificial service if they receive the blood of the sacrifice. And so as we pick up with the two dots at on Yud Zayin Amabet, the Gemara quotes the Mishnah's reference to Mechusar Begadim, namely a Kohen who is not wearing all of his garments. And we're going to see that on some level doesn't mean just not wearing all of the garments. That's sort of the literal translation of Mechusar Begadim, meaning missing some garment. But we're also going to see that if he has an extra garment, it's not going to be valid. So let's take a look and we'll see how do we know it. So Minolan is the Gemara's question. Where do we know this from? How do we know that, in fact, somebody who's wearing too few garments is going to be a problem? So Amar Rabbi Yavua, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So it said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Umatu ba Mishmei Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon. And some people say it was not in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. It was Rabbi Elazar ben the son of Rabbi Shimon, in whose name it was said. But what was it that was said? The Amar Kra, it was based on the following verse. The Chagarta Osam. This is a pasuk in Bamidbar. I'm sorry, excuse me.
Vayikra.
In
No, in
Shmot.
Shmot.
Shmot, Perak Kaftet, Pasuk Tet, B'chagarta Osam Avneit Aaron Uvanav, B'chavashta Lahem Migbaot, B'haisa Lahem Kuna Lechukas Olam. So, and you shall, girdle them with a sash, Aaron and his sons, and you shall wrap the headdress on them, and the priesthood shall be for them as an eternal law. So that's a sort of simple translation. But on the last words, V'haisa Lahem, so it should be for them. So what is the it referring to? And so the Gemara in this interpretation of Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Lazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, he offers the following: Bisman shebigdeihem aleihem, when they are wearing those garments, kuna sam aleihem. That's when they're kohanim, because it didn't need to say vayisalahem kuna luchukas olam. Meaning, why is it referencing them as being an eternal priesthood for them? It didn't need to say that, and so as a result, that's how we're going to learn it. And ain big dayim aleim, when their clothing is not on them, ain kuna sam aleim. It's as if they're not kohanim. And Rashi gives us the details. So take a look at Rashi. Third,
Vayitalahem.
Vaitalahem, exactly. That's the Rashi. Third line, first wide line at the bottom of Rashi. Halevisha hazos. This garment, right? The clothing that they're wearing, because that's what was said just before Vahaisalahem, is V'chagarta osam avneit and V'chavashta lahem migbaot. So those garments that are being on the Kohen, likahuna, they create the sense of being a Kohen. Alma kahuna san tuluya bibigdehen. So we see that their status of Kohanim is dependent on their wearing of garments. The ilo havu luhu zarim, and if they don't have them, they're effectively non-kohanim. Ubizar ashkechan demachil aboda, and as we've seen before, in fact, I think that was the first item in our opening Mishnah in the second parak. Let me just test my recollection. Yes, kol hazvachim shekiblu daman. Zar was the first item, a non-Kohen, and we saw already the proof that a zar is going to invalidate a Kohen. And so, reading the last words of that Rashi, ubizar ashkekan demachil avoda, we've seen already that a non-Kohen, trafes up, to put it in a colloquial version, messes up profanes the service. And so as a result, that is the basis for saying that you must be wearing your garments.
But this seems very general. Kahuna tam alehem. You could almost think that they lose the kahuna. For instance, what about the aliyah, truma, the benching, and so forth? Right? They don't lose.
Correct.
They're still but
They're still Kohanim for
I
that.
know.
The key is that obviously this is, you're right. You could argue that maybe this is loses it there entirely. And there is a story that goes along those lines that suggests that maybe Kohanim, shouldn't be treated like Kohanim, even for all those other things as well. And the question is whether maybe it's just rabbinic. But in any event, the bottom line is that we do. Obviously we limit this. This is really just in connection with the service, and it's that it's they're treated like a non-Kohen with respect to the service in the Beis Hamikdash. Now, the Gemara is about to ask 3 times. 1 second, how can you say that we learned from Perek Kaftet Pasuk Tet in Shemot? We have another source. And what we are going to do over the next few minutes is 3 times we're going to say, you know what? If we only had one source, we might not have known X. And as we're going to then expand that as we go. So again, we've now said that a Kohen who's not wearing all the garments is invalidates the service of a sacrifice. In particular, if they receive the blood, it's considered the sacrifice has become profane and is no longer a valid sacrifice. So v'hamahacha nafka. 1 second, you're telling me that we learn it from Shmo Kaf Tet Pasuk Tet Mehasam nafka. I know that we learn it from somewhere else. The Tanya, we have a brisa that tells us it, and so the brisa says the following: Minayin. Now the brisa I'll begin with. I'll warn you. The first part of the brisa does not have to do with wearing too many garments. It has to do with drinking wine. Minayin l'shasuya yayin she'im avad. Hillel. If how do I know? And we are now 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up on the Yud Zayin Amabet. Minayin l'shasuya yayin she'im avad Hillel. How do I know that if somebody who drank some wine and is a Kohen, that if he did the service, it becomes invalidated, becomes profane? Talmud Lomar yayin v'shechar al tasht. It says in Vayikra that you're not allowed to drink wine. Ula havdil bein hakodesh uvein hachol. This is from Vayikra Perek Yud, Psukim Tet and Yud. So, and if you and you need to drink, not to drink wine, because you need to distinguish between the kodesh and the chol. And so, as a result, as Rashi tells us, last Rashi on Yud Zayin Amabet uvein hachol avodah she'ata oved b'shichrut kruyachol. And that the whole point is that the juxtaposition of drinking wine with this concept of differentiating between kodesh and chol is telling us that if you drink wine, then it's going to be considered as if the sacrifice that you had is profane, is chol. So and how do I? So okay, so that's step 1. But now we get to the mechusar begadim point. Mechusar begadim v'shelo rechutz yadayim v'raglayim minayin. How do I know that somebody who's missing a garment, a Kohen who's missing a garment, or a Kohen who did not wash his hands and feet before the service, that he's also going to create a problem and it's going to invalidate the sacrifice? Talmud Lomar chukah l'gzeira shava. The word chukah exists. And take a look at the top Rashi on Yud Chet Amud Aleph, chukah, b'shtuya yayin ksiv chukat olam. The word chok is in connection with a Kohen who drinks wine, and ubech mechusar begadim ksiv kuna l'chukat olam. It should also be he'll be a Kohen as a eternal law. Uberechitzas yad v'regel, and also when it comes to the washing of hands and feet. Take a look at the Bach to see that it changes to Chok Olam. So all 3 of these, and there are again 3 different psukim, and so as a result we have 3 psukim. Shmot Kaf Tet Tet. That's a reference to the Chok in connection with the garment. Shmot Lamed Kaf Aleph is in connection with washing hands and feet. And with respect to drinking wine, it's Vayikra Parak Yud Pasuk Tet. So as a result, so now we have a good question because we have a brisa. This is our first question. We're going to have three of these. The first question is we have a brisa that seems to say that we learn that mechusar kapara, mechusar begadim, excuse me, is a problem based on a gzera shava from the knowing that the prohibition is that you can't drink wine and do the service. So just as you can't drink wine and do a service, so too, based on the Gzera Shava, you can't be missing garments and do the service. No. So actually, we need both. So it's not, this is an interesting situation. We're not going to effectively say that the second source is not a valid source. We're going to say, imehasam, if we only had that second source, oh, that Gzera Shava, hava amina, hani mili avoda dezar, chayev aleh misa. I would have thought that just as in connection with drinking wine and doing the service, you're going to get the death penalty. And so too, any other service that the person would do and end up being subject to the death penalty, then that would be the service that if you were missing begadim would not be valid. But other services, it would not necessarily be the case. As Rashi tells us, imehasam mishatuya yayin, if we only learn from the drinking of wine, hava mina, I would have thought, hani mili demichle avoda, that it's only when you are causing a profaning of the service. begadim ba'avoda shahazar chayev aleha misa. It would have to be some kind of service that is subject to a non-Kohen being subject to the death penalty. Kidiksiv be'ahukra bivoachem el oel moed v'lo tamusu. Because the Torah says that when you come to the Oel Moed, you shouldn't die. So that was in connection with not drinking wine. And so as a result, we'll say that the same principle would apply to other things as well, that it's got to be subject to the death penalty. Ba'avodashi yesh b'chiyuv misa, that it's got to be some kind of service that subjects you to the death penalty. Lipsulim, for people who are puzzle. Hakasu medaber, and that's what the Torah is talking about there. Ve'eno ella arba avodos, and that is only refers to four different services. These are the four services that are the conclusory services in their context, in their own context. And what are they? Zrika, it's where the throwing of the blood. V'haktara, it's the burning of the sacrifice. V'niso chamayim v'hayayin, and also sometimes the water libations or the wine libations. Each of those can serve as potential final item. So now let's go back into the Gemara. And so
they would incur the death penalty.
And so no, the point is that yes, a czar who does that gets the death penalty. I believe it's a death penalty at the hands of heaven, not and by the not by the court. But the point is that only if a Kohen were missing a garment for one of those four services, only then would the Kohen end up invalidating the service. Just like wine is subject, causes somebody to, is about the reference to wine refers to death. That life is on the line in connection with wine, and so as a result, because the pasuk says life is on the line, I might have thought that also with respect to being mechusar begadim, it's only where life would be on the line for a non-Kohen to do the item. Aval avoda de ein zar, back into the Gemara, third line, third word, on Yud Chet Amud Aleph, aval avoda de ein zar chayev aleha misa emelo. But I might have thought that if in fact the service was one of the services like the receiving of blood, which is not a service that if a non-Kohen does, a non-Kohen will cause the sacrifice to be invalid, but it wouldn't subject that non-Kohen to the death penalty. And so as a result, maybe I would think that if a Kohen was missing garments and he did receiving of the blood, it would not invalidate it because that's not subject, not a service that subjects a non-Kohen to the death penalty. So Kamash Malan. So as a result, now because we have both the Gzeira Shava and Perek Kaftet Pasuk Tet in Shmot, now we can say not only in the case where death is on the line, but even in the other services as well. So Ashkechan Meschusar Begadim Shtuya Yayin Minalan. Okay, but you've now shown the fact that only with respect to wearing the garments, or not wearing all the garments, would you be invalidating the service if even if it's not something that a czar would be subject to the death penalty? But how do I know about the wine situation? If you drank wine, that it doesn't only apply when death is on the line if it was a non-Kohen. How do I know that it applies to all the services and not just the final step services of Zrika, what are they? Zrika, sorry, Zrika, Haktara, and Nisucha Mayan V'yayin. And so as a result, how do I know that it's not just those four services? So the Gemara says, Asya chuka chuka mimuchusar begadim. So we'll learn it from a Gzeira Shava from Mechusar Begadim. Well, so we'll learn it in the other direction. We were originally thinking that we were learning chuka chuka, that Mechusar Begadim we were learning from Yayin, but no, we're going to learn Yayin from Mechusar Begadim now. But 1 second though, V'hatana ulahavdil bain kanasiv la. But 1 second, you can't tell me that the lesson about wine drinking is from a Gzeira Shava. The brisa that we just cited said that the reason that we know that the wine drinking is prohibited is based on the lahavdil ben kodesh lebein achol, that the juxtaposition of the pasuk tet in Perek Yud of Vayikra and Pasuk Yud of Perek Yud in Sefer Vayikra, where we said first that you can't drink wine, and then we say that you have to distinguish between the sacred and the profane. And so, how can you tell me that we're learning from a Gzeira Shava? We're learning it from Ulahavdil, Bein HaKodesh u'Bein HaChol. So, no, Mikame de Lekum Gzeira Shava. Nah, that was before we had the Gzeira Shava. Now that we know this Gzeira Shava, so fine. So now, instead of learning it from Ulahavdil, we're going to learn it from the Gzeira Shava. But 1 second, you can't say that. V'hatana mechusar begadim hu dekayalav mishtuya yain. We specifically said that we were learning mechusar begadim from the drinking of the wine. So now you're taking it all in the opposite direction of how you originally said it. So, Haki Kamar. No, all right, so we're going to reword or restate what that brisa was trying to say. And so the brisa begins by telling us, how do I know that drinking wine is prohibited? And so the answer is based on Perek Yud, Pasuk Tet and Yud in Sefer Vayikra, where it first tells you that you're prohibited to drink wine, a Kohen's prohibited to drink wine, and then says Lahavdil ben Kodesh ben HaKodesh u'bein HaChol, that we need to distinguish between the holy and the profane. And so uminayin shalo nechlaku mechusar begadim l'shtuya yayin the shalo rechutz yadayim v'raglayim. And so how do I know that whether it's mechusar begadim or shtuya yayin or one who does the service with unwashed hands and feet, how do I know that it applies to every avoda? Talmud Lomar chuka chuka l'gzeira shava. So in fact, the gzeira shava is what tells us that all of the different services are covered whether it's washing using unwashed hands and feet, whether it's drinking wine, whether it's lacking the garments. In all all those cases, no matter what the service is, not just the four that would subject a czar to the death penalty, whatever the service is, that's going to it's going to be invalid and going to make the korban puzzle. So Ella lahavdil lamali. Well, in the end, now what do we need the lahavdil to teach us? In the end, that lahavdil doesn't really need to teach us anything. So look at the Rav. You know what? It can teach us a lesson that Rav taught. And what was the lesson that Rav taught? The Rav lo mokim amora alei miyom tava lechavre. That when it was Yontif, Rav would not set up somebody to speak on his behalf because he was not going to give a shear with halacha on Yontif because he had mishum shikrus, because he had drunk something. And this is the idea that once you've drunk something, maybe you shouldn't paskin halacha. And so let's take a look at Rashi. 3, 6, 9, 10 lines down in the medium wide lines at the bottom of Rashi on Yud Chet Amud Aleph, Miyom Tavul Lechavre, Mishasha Achal V'Shasa, V'Asa Yom Tov, at the time that he ate and he drank and he made it a Yom Tov, Ad Lamachar, until the next day, Dahachi Mashma Kra, that this is the way he understands the Pasuk. Yayin V'Shechar Al Tesht B'Voachem, don't drink wine, or alcohol or intoxicating drink when you come to the Beit Hamikdash. V'chein bisha, and similarly, bisha she'ata ba lahavdil lahorot bein davar kedusha ledavar chol al tehi shechrut. So similarly, you should, and when you come to distinguish between what is holy and what is not holy, by teaching halacha and teaching Torah, then you need to also be careful that you are not drunk and you haven't drunk any wine. Okay, so that is addition number one. That is the first of the efforts to try and say, hey, I thought we learned it from something else. I'm sorry for not fully scrolling. So, but now we're going to
But
go.
wouldn't he also hold that the Kohen should not be drunk?
Of course, the coin's not Shema Peter. The point is that we didn't need the Lahavdil any longer because we're learning it from Gzeira Shava. That in the end, effectively, how do we know that there's some kind of prohibition? It's because it says, yain, don't drink wine. And then, how do I know that that applies to everything and not just the four final services? That's because it says that's because we have the Gzeira Shava, and the Gzeira Shava connects us to Mechusar Begadim. Mechusar Begadim in Perek Kaf Tet, Pasuk Tet of Shmot. That's how we know that it's Mechusar Begadim applies to every service. And so as a result, so now we're going to apply to every service the same prohibition of drinking alcohol. And so as a result, now what do we do with the lahavdil? We can use it for what Rav taught us, that Rav teaches that not only does it tell you about being careful when you go into the Beis Hamikdash, but you also have to be careful not to drink wine if you're going to be teaching halacha.
Does this apply to every
wine?
service?
Go ahead, James. You go first.
Didn't they drink wine like instead of water?
Well, often they would drink alcohol instead of water in general. You meaning the average person drank, especially in Europe, would drink a lot of beer, and so there was often alcoholic beverages in order to protect against the health conditions that are associated with contaminated water. But the bottom line is that if you drank some alcoholic beverage, then you would not be able to do the Kohen services. And of course, that actually connects to Simchas Torah, and that's why many shuls do Birkas Kohanim in Shachris as opposed to Musaf, because they're worried about their Kohanim drinking. At HIR, because we don't have any alcohol, so we don't have that issue, and so we do it in Musaf. We keep it at Musaf. But the point is that that is an applicable rule today. But the bottom line is that notwithstanding the fact that many beverages are intoxicating, if a Kohen is going to be serving in the Beis Hamikdash, He can't be drinking those
I was
beverages.
asking more in terms of Rabba, if he was drinking wine. I guess what's is there a line between just drinking wine and being drunk, or he's saying anytime you drink wine you shouldn't partake?
That's an excellent question. There is definitely a minimal amount. There's debate about that issue. In general, we understand that if you begin to be affected by the wine, then for sure it's going to be a problem. So if you just have a sip, it's probably still okay. But obviously there are some who want to be even stricter about that. But if you are, you know. Thankfully, there are other drinks that were okay, meaning
Rashi doesn't seem to be making that distinction. He just said whenever he drank wine, he would
yeah,
not
well, that
possibly.
so some people say note the fact that it was specifically on Yontif, and so
Yontif,
as a result, that would be when he might drink more wine,
more
and
wine
so
than
and
usual.
so as a result, it's not the usual amount of wine, and so that's why he couldn't do it. But if
Gotcha.
you just had a
Okay,
regular and you did one glass of wine, so then maybe it wouldn't be a problem. So,
gotcha. Thank you.
all right.
Well, we just
So,
we mentioned it with all the services that washing his hands and so forth, his feet,
yep,
that would be also included. But I'm
correct.
thinking of a different interpretation of service. Does this prohibition apply eh, to everything the Kohen would do such Aaron the Kohen would madliket and nerot every boker? Would that or does this just apply to korbanot that it would be per
This is definitely only about korbanot, but you ask a good question as to whether or not the um,
there are other
dealing with the
services.
menorah required it. I believe that there was a question about the we didn't want the Kohanim to get their clothing dirty. So obviously, like the Trumas Hadeshen, the Kohanim did not necessarily wear their special garments
Right.
because we don't want them to get dirty. So I don't know whether the menorah may be similar. I don't remember. I don't remember that, but
But
hopefully
there are
we'll
other
see that
ones,
over the
like you said,
course.
Trumat Hadeshin and
Yeah.
bringing maybe the lechem upanim. What there are, it could be other
And then
things.
and then of course there's the burning of the carbon of the not carbon of the para duma, which we've
Duma,
seen
right?
already. So clearly for many of those things you do not need to be wearing your priestly garments in order to be able to do them.
But is
Okay,
there a prohibition of wine for those
a
other?
prohibition of wine. That's a good question also. I would think so, but I'm not 100% sure. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Okay, now we've learned already. Now it's coming from two different sources: the Gzeira Shava of Chuka, and of course the pasuk in Shmot Parakuf Tet pasuk Tet. But now we got to see: is it going to be? Is that it, or is there something else as well? So. Akati mehacha nafka mehasam nafka. What are you talking about by telling me that those are the sources? Here's the source because we have another brisa. V'nasnu b'nei Aaron Kohen that the sons of Aaron the Kohen would place. This is referring to there's a pasuk in Vayikra Perek Aleph pasuk Zayin. Biki who know that v'nasnu b'nei Aaron Kohen. Why did it need to reference the Kohen? If take a look at Rashi, Mahasam Nafka, Akati Kra'akrina. There's another pasuk, Kasib. The Lamai Itzterich HaKohen. Why did it need to say the word HaKohen here? Hacha. Gabi v'natnu b'nei Aaron HaKohen Eish. La'ashma'inan mechusa begadim. And that the whole point is that we learn from here the concept of that he has to be in his Bikihuno, in his priestly state. What does that mean? It means wearing his priestly garments. And so if he's not wearing his garments, he can't be bringing the Aish. So Limaid al Kohen Gadol Shalavash Big Day Kohen Hedyot Va'avad Avodato Psula. So this teaches regarding a Kohen Gadol who wore the garments of a regular Kohen and performed any kind of service, that service is going to be invalid because the Torah says, because we learned Bikihu no. Take a look at Rashi. Bikihu no, it's in the medium wide lines. It's 9 lines up, first word on the line. B'kiyuno b'shashahu miluvash b'gadav, when he's wearing his garments, nikra Aaron HaKohen. Then he's called Aaron HaKohen. Lo kishahu lavush big day hedyot. But now while he's wearing the garments of a regular Kohen, he's got to be wearing the garments of the Kohen Gadol. So that also teaches that you got to wear the right clothing. No, Ima Hassam, if we only had that source for us, sorry for not scrolling, here we go. If we only had that source of Perek Aleph Pasuk Zayin in Vayikra, I would have thought Hava Amina Hani Mili Avoda de Ma'akva Kapara, that it's only when it's something that is necessary for atonement. Aval Avoda de Lo Ma'akva Kapara, but an avoda that wasn't necessary for atonement, I wouldn't have learned that. And so as a result, that is point number two. So again, so now not only is it all the services that are subject to the death penalty and all the other services, but also services that are not essential for atonement. So, for example, burning the innards of the burning the parts of the body of the sacrifice is not required, and therefore you might have thought doesn't apply. And so this tells us no, it does apply. Try number three. So 1 second, you're going to tell me we learn it from there? We learn it from somewhere else. Again, citing a brisa. This is a pasuk. The next pasuk in Vayikra, Perek Aleph pasuk Chet, v'archu b'nei Aaron haKohanim es hanisachim. Again, we didn't need to know. We already know that b'nei Aaron are the Kohanim. Why does it say haKohanim there? HaKohanim b'kihunam. Again, it means that they've got to be wearing their garments, their priestly garments. Mikan lekohen hedyot shalavash bigdei kohen gadol va'avad avodato psula. This shows that if a regular kohen wore the garments of a kohen gadol, that would be a problem. So why do we need all these other sources? So ima hasam, if we only had that as our source, hava amina hanimili chiser. I mean, if I only had Perek Kaf Tet Pasuk Tet as our source, Hava Amina Hani Mili Chiser. I would have known only if you were missing a garment. Aval Yitor Lo, I would have thought that if a regular Kohen wore the garments of a Kohen Gadol, well then okay, he's a little bit maybe haughty that he was wearing somebody else's garments, but it's extra garments. It's not too little. So therefore, Kamash Malan, now we have this pasuk also, and it tells us that if a regular Kohen is wearing the Kohen Gadol's garments, it's also going to be problematic. And so we end up having the following. We've learned about Mechusar Begadim in 4 parts. I have it specifically on the screen. Number 1, the basic prohibition is from Shmot Kaf Tet Tet. Then we expand the application even to services that are not subject to the death penalty, and that's from the Gzeira Shava with wine. And then expanding the prohibition to even unnecessary services like bringing the fire to the altar is included through Vayikra Perek Aleph Pasuk Zayin. And finally, expanding the prohibition to even where a regular Kohen wears the garments of a Kohen Gadol is through Vayikra Perek Aleph Pasuk Chet. And so as a result, we've now learned the broad application that it's not just even though we call it Mechusar Begadim, it's not just Mechusar Begadim, it also could apply to wearing extra garments. And now we're going to see that application in detail in a related brisa. So, Tana Rabbanan. Again, we're now 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 lines up. First words on the line from the bottom of Yudchet Amud Aleph. Tana Rabbanan, Hayim Merushalin. If you had your garments, if the Kohen's garments were dragging on the ground, meaning that they're too long. Rashi tells us, in fact, it's good to keep a finger on Rashi and in the Gemara at this point, because we're going to do a lot of Rashi right now. Merushalin, Nigrarin, Bakarka. They're dragging on the ground. Okay? Misulakin, if they're suspended, how does that mean? With Misulakin, Rashi, Minakarka, they're separated from the ground. Mitok Shehem Kitsarim, because they're too short. Okay, Mishuchakim, if they're, what does that mean? Rashi tells us, back into Rashi, second to last line, even in the widest lines, Yishanim, it's older, Yishanim, they're Yishanim, they're older, and so as a result, it's worn out. Okay.
How old is that? Does he have to change his garments every year, every 6 months, or?
That there is a discussion in the Rishonim over that. I don't have a specific number. I do think that there was an idea that they needed to change it every year, but I'm not 100% sure. But it's certainly a valid question as to what would consider be worn out. But wait till you hear this, because even if that's all true, even if they're dragging, even if they're too short, even if they're worn out, the avad, and he did the service. Now, clearly, he shouldn't do the service. It's better to wear the right garment. Avoda sok shera. The service is valid. When is it that the service is not valid? Now the Brisa continues. Lavash shnei michnasayim. If he's wearing two sets of pants, shnei avnetim, two belts, chiser achas. If he's missing one, yiter achas, or he's wearing one extra, oshahaisa lo ritiya al makas bisaro takas bigdo, or he's got a bandage on his flesh underneath the garment, so the garment is not touching his skin. Oshahayu, as we turn to Yurchet Amabet, mitushta shin, if it's dirty, and Rashi says betit, it's got mud on it. O mikorain, or they're torn. The avad, and then you do the service. Avodaso psula. Their service is invalid. So we see that there are certain things that are going to make it invalid and certain things that are be okay. Now, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Mirushalin Kesherin Misulakin Psulin. That actually Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel that if they drag, it's okay, but if they're suspended, then it's not okay. Oh, v'hatanya mesulakin sherim. How can you say Shmuel? How can you say that Shmuel said that it was invalid if they were suspended? We specifically said in the Brisa that if they're suspended, it's kosher. So Amar Rami Bar Chama comes to the rescue. Lo kasha, not a difficult thing at all. Kan in our Brisa. Shasil Khan al Yadei Avnate. Really, they were the right length, but you accidentally shorten them with a belt. And so your belt bunched up the garment, and so as a result, it looks like it's too short. But Khan, when we said that it's in Shmuel's rule that he says that it's puzzle, delays nehumi kara klal, then it's where it wasn't long enough at all. And so as a result, that's going to be the situation. Rav Amar, Rav, who often disagrees with Shmuel, is going to disagree with him here as well. Echad zeh, the echad zeh psulin. Our initial thought of what Rav means, take a look at Rashi. Last word on the third line of Rashi. Echad zeh, ve'echad zeh. Echad mirushalin, whether it's dragging. Ve'echad misulakin, whether it's too short, whether it's hanging. Yoter midai, if it's more than it's supposed to. Shalo al yedei avnate, and even not through the belt. So in both those situations, it's going to be invalid. Rav Huna ikla la'argiza. Now, obviously the question now to ask is, hey, I don't understand. Rav is even more different from our Brisa than Shmuel is. Rav, it seems like it's problematic both with respect to the suspension and with respect to the dragging. So how can you say that it's got that they're both, that it's okay? This seems to be completely inconsistent.
Well, that's what my question. Didn't Rob know the Breita?
Yes, exactly. We are going to get there, but first we have to tell a short story. Rav Huna ikla la Argiza. So Rav Huna was visiting Argiza. Ramalei bar ushbichane, that the contradiction was brought to him by the son of the innkeeper. So mi amar Shmuel mirushalin ksherim umisulakin psulin. Did Shmuel say that when it comes to dragging, it's good, it's okay, but when it's suspended, it's not? Vatanya misulakin ksherin. But we said specifically that suspended is okay. So amar le bar mina dahi. That you don't even need to worry about. Dishanaye Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama already answered that. As we saw, that we're dealing with is when it says that it's suspended, it means when it's suspended, that it's suspended in kosher, it's because it was the belt that caused it to be suspended. But if it was just plain too short, then it wouldn't be kosher. El Rav kasha. But I'll tell you who the question really you need to ask about. It's Rav's opinion. Because after all, he says that both dragging and too short are a problem. So v'chitema, my mirushalin, and if you tell me what does it mean to be dragging, misulakin ayadei avnei, it means that where you that what does it mean in the brisa when it says that dragging is okay? It means that you were wearing a belt and you caused it to come up, and so it was actually of the right height. Meaning that if you left it dragging, it's going to be a problem. But if you use the belt to cinch it up, it's going to be okay. Va'avnei megiz agiz, because the belt will act as if it cuts off the material, meaning by effectively doubling up some of the material higher up on the person's garment, it will cut it off and make it as if it's shorter. So, but ela misulakin kasha. But that then creates a real problem, because what did we say is okay? We said right now, according to Shmuel, what's okay is if the belt was what caused it to be too high. But if the belt changing the height creates something as if it's not there any longer, after all, the belt made something that was dragging now okay when it's the right height. So if it makes it too high, so then we have no situation where it's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay if it's too high by itself, and it's not going to be okay if it's too high as a result of the belt. So Rabbi Zera, Rav Chadatane. Actually, Rav was not saying two laws, he was saying one law. And what was the law he was saying? Mirushalin shesilkan al yedei avnei ksherim. That if it's dragging because of the belt, and then because of the belt, it is no longer dragging, so then it's going to be kosher. And so what we end up with is the following. Shmuel says that if it's dragging, it's okay. If it fits well and it's shortened by the belt, it's okay. If it's dragging and it was shortened by the belt to the right size, that's okay. But if it's too short, that's going to be a problem according to Shmuel. And according to Rav, if it fits, that's great. But if it's dragging, that's going to be problematic. If it's too short, it's going to be problematic. If it is too short only because of a belt, it's going to be problematic. And only if it's dragging but shortened by the right size, then it will work. So basically, for Rav, it needs to look like it fits. If it doesn't look like it fits, then it's going to be problematic. Whereas Shmuel says that as long as it can look like it fits, even if it doesn't look like it fits in actuality, it will be okay. And what's the only situation where it can't look like it fits is if it's too short, because there's no possibility of cinching it up, because you can't cinch it down because it's too short. Okay, so that is the discussion of Rav and Shmuel.
The Rav says Merushalim was pasul. Rashi brought that out, right?
No. Well, remember, we have a brisa that said that Merushalim and Merushalim, that whether it was whether it's Merushalim or Misulakin, it was going to be kosher.
Right.
Okay. So we need to have situations where all of these are potentially kosher. And so according to that's the brisa. Shmuel says that if it's dragging, it's kosher, and if it's too short, it's pasul. So how did we understand it? We understood that if it's too short because it's literally not enough fabric, then it's going to be pasul. But if it's too short because of a belt, so then it'll be fine.
Right.
But and Rav says no, it's got to look like it fits, and that the situation where Rav is talking about is that if in fact that if it was too long and you shortened it through using the belt, then it's going to be okay. Or if it fits, it's going to be okay. But all other situations, it's going to be problematic. And we understand him as essentially saying that when it says that it's short, it's if it would have been short with the belt, but you don't, but you sort of make sure that it's long enough, then it will be okay. So the bottom line is that misulakin, according to Rab, is effectively a non-existent category of being kosher. And so as a result, he effectively eliminates that category.
So if it's Meshulakim on its own, it would be kosher according to Rob?
No, according to Rav and
No.
Misulakin on its own, everybody's going to say that's going to be invalid. Everybody agrees. Rav and Shmuel would agree to that, right?
But
It's
that's
only
against the Breita.
no. We say that it's not inconsistent with the Breita because the question is if it's Misulakin as a result of a belt,
Okay, as a result of the belt.
according
Okay.
to
Right.
Shmuel. That's how we understand it. And I guess you can try to understand that way according to
Rob.
as well. And the disagreement is only in connection with if it's dragging and been and the disagreement is if it was fit well, but then you shortened it
Oh, the
by
belt.
wearing the belt.
Right.
Then
Yeah.
that would be no.
Kosher according to Rob.
That would be no, that would be kosher according to Shmuel and not kosher according to Rav.
No, Rob says it fits. If it's Merushalim shel Silkan al yedei avnei kasher, that's Rob, isn't it? Rob
Well, both
Chadatani.
both both Rav and Shmuel agree that if it was too long and you shortened it with the belt, it's going to work. That's
Right,
going to be fine.
right.
Where they disagree is on if it's if it's dragging, then Rav says that it's not
Also,
kosher, and
also,
Shmuel says that it's
it's
valid.
kosher. Right,
Okay, that's where Rav and Shmuel
right,
disagree.
right, right.
Okay, just mark that to make it clear. Okay. All right. So now Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah of Midifti. So Rabbi Yirmiyah from Difti says the following. He's going to have a question. So Mirushalin shalo silkan. If it's dragging and the garments that were and it was raised Mirushalin Shalo Silkan Tanaihi. That if in fact if it's dragging and the belt raised it up and now it's the right height, maybe that's a machlokus among Tanaim. Titania again because that is the machlokas no,
No,
because
this
the
it didn't raise it.
dragging. I'm sorry, it's dragging when and
Did,
not with a belt. The
didn't
dragging
did not
period.
raise it. Did not
Right,
raise it.
not raise it.
Shalo
Right,
Silkan.
exactly, correct. Because that is the machlokas that we said between Shmuel and Rav. Shmuel says it's kosher. Rav says it's not. And so we're going to say maybe we could say this is actually a machlokas tanaim because we have two different brises. Brisa number one, Titania, al arba kanfos ksuska. That if you have four corners of your garment, that's what requires for tzitzis. Arba below shalosh. And we say, well, four means not three, because if you have three, you definitely don't have four. Oh, no ella arba below chamesh. Well, 1 second. Maybe it means four and not five. Well, Kishahu Omer, when the pasuk continues and says, Asher techasebo, that you're going to cover yourself with it, that implies however many corners it has. Hare balas chameshamor. That could include even a five-cornered garment. Ha ma'ani mekayim arba. All right, so well then how do I fulfill the need to have four in the reference to four. Arba below shalosh. It means four and not three. Uma reisa larabos balos chamesh lahotzi balas shalosh. How come you're including five in the corporation of four, but not three in corporation of four? Maybe you should just do everything in the reverse. No, miraba ani balas chamesh. No, because if you have a five-corner garment, sheyesh bichlal chamesh arba. Five includes four, so you have four corners that you could put the tzitzis on. Umotzi ani ba'alas shalosh, but I'm going to exclude three she'ein bichlal shalosh arba, because you can't make four corners with tzitzis if you only have three corners. V'tanya idach, and there's another brisa. Now that brisa that says that if you have four, it's okay. I mean, if you have five, it's okay, and you could just use four, is consistent with the idea of it dragging on the ground, because you in both, just like dragging has extra fabric, a fifth corner is extra fabric. So Tanya Idach, well, we have another brisa, al arba kanafos ksuscha, again citing that same pasuk in Bamidbar, in Dvarim Perek Kaf Bet pasuk Yud Bet, and that same pasuk says arba below shalosh, and the brisa says arba below shalosh, arba below chamesh. That this other brisa, the Tana in this other brisa, says it means four and not three, and four and not five. Well, there we go. My la b'hakamivli. What do you think they're arguing about? Mar savar yasar mikaman de'ise dame. That the person who says that four and not five is saying that if you have extra, it's as if it stays there. And so as a result, five corners is not good. And similarly, dragging is not good. Umar savar command delay say dummy. And the other person who says that it means four and not three, but four could include five. So then they would say, no, it's as if it doesn't exist. If you have extra, we can ignore it. Just like we're going to ignore the extra garment that's dragging on the ground. Lo, not necessarily. Really, maybe everybody thinks that the garment does exist, the extra garment does exist, and therefore everybody would say that if it's dragging, it would be potentially problematic. V'shayni hacha. In this case, by the tzitzis, it's different. The Rabbi Rachmana asher techaseba, that the Torah specifically had the term asher techaseba, that you should be covered with it. And so covering yourself includes more corners. And so even a five-cornered garment would be included. V'idach, well, 1 second. According to the second brisa, where they do not include a five-cornered garment, what is Hai Asher Techaseba my avidlai? What does he do with that same language of that which with which you cover yourself? So Mibai, like look at the Tanya, he needs it for the following brisa, uritem also, that you have to be able to see the tzitzis. That of course is from Parsha Shlach, the end of Parsha Shlach, pasuk perek tesvav, pasuk lamed tet, and what does it come to tell us? Prat l'chasus laila. It tells you that wearing a nighttime garment is not covered by tzitzis. That if you have a nighttime garment, namely your covers or whatever, you do not need to cover the corners with tzitzis. Oenu ela prat l'chasus zuma. Well, maybe it could mean the garments of somebody who's blind, because after all, a blind person can't see it either. V'keshehu omer asher techased ba. Well, since we have the pasuk in Sefer Dvarim of that which with which you cover yourself, that includes, doesn't have anything to do with seeing. Harek susuma amor. That shows that the garments of a blind person are also covered by the obligation for tzitzis. So ha ma ani mekayim urisim also. So if in fact the blind person is covered by tzitzis, how do I fulfill the commandment that you have to be able to see it? Prat l'chasus laila. So we exclude things that you wear only at night. Umara Isa Larabos Ksus Suma Ulahosik Sus Laila. Why did you choose to include the garments of a blind person and to exclude the garments at night? Mirabet, do the exact opposite. Miraba Aniksus Suma, Sheyeshna Beria Eitzalacherim, Umotzi Aniksus Laila, Sheina Beria Eitzalachem. Well, I'll tell you why we don't do it the other way. Because I'm going to include a blind person's garment because other people can see it. But when it comes to a nighttime garment, it's not seen by anybody because it's a nighttime garment and it's nighttime and there's no lights in the time that we're talking about. So as a result, that's why we're not going to do it. The idach. And what about the other opinion? That how did they know that in fact that includes the nighttime, that it excludes the nighttime garments and includes the garments of a blind person? Nafkale mi asher. He learns it from the word asher of the pasuk asher techaseba. He learns it one thing from asher and one thing from techaseba. So beidach and the other one, what does he do with the asher? Asher lo darish. He doesn't do anything with that asher. Okay, so Tanura Banan, Bad. So the rabbis taught Bad. So now we're going to have what the material is. How do we know what the material is of the garments of the Kohanim? So it says Bad. Sheyehu shel butz. Well, it teaches us that they've got to be linen. Bad sheyehu chadashim. And they need to be new. Bad sheyehu shizurim. And it should be twisted threads. Bad sheyehu chutan kafol shisha. And they need to be six-fold, and essentially six strands to every thread. Bad shelo yilbash shel choli mahen. And the Kohen should not wear the non-consecrated garment with the garments of the Kohanim, the priestly garments. So Amar Abaye l'Rav Yosef Bishlam Yeshahu Shabutz. I understand that they need to be made out of linen, ha kamash malan, because that's what it's saying. Butz ein midiachrina lo. Because when we say bad, it means butz, and that teaches us not anything else. Elabad shihu chadashim. But how do you know that bad means new? Chadashim in shechakim lo. It should be new and not used. But we know that we can use, as we saw in the brisa a little while ago, that mishuchakim, that if it's worn out, it's still kosher. So Amar Le ulatamech. 1 second, according to your reasoning, bad shehu chutan kafol shisha. How do you know that it should be sixfold the thread? Bad chad chad lichudei mashma. Bad itself implies livad, alone, and so as a result, each thread should be on its own. Ela hakikamar. You have to understand that this is what the brisa is trying to tell us. Begadim shenemar behen bad. There are garments that it said about bad. Tzrichin sheyehu shel butz. They need to be made out of linen. Chadashim. They need to be new. Shazurin. They need to be twisted. Sheyehu chutan kafol shisha. They need to have sixfold over. Yesh mehen lemitzvah. Some of these are required but not mandatory, but meaning that they're not essential. And yesh mehen la'akev, and there are some of them that are actually essential. Mimai dahai bad kisnahu. So how do we know that bad actually means linen? So Amar Rebbe Yosef, Rebbe Chanina, davar ha'olam min akarka bad bivad. It's something that grows up from the ground from a single stalk. You put one seed in, you get one stalk. Ema Amra. Well, 1 second, I could give you a justification for it meaning wool, because you take a hair, it comes out of one hole, and that one hole gives you one hair. Well, Amra mitpsal. No, wool splits after it grows out. The reason that it's got all that, it's not doesn't feel like a person's hair on their head when you pet a sheep. It's because the wool split, the hairs split. Well, kisnanami mipsal, but flax also splits. No, it does split. You're right, but al yedei lakusa mitzvah. The when it splits is because you're beating it. It doesn't split on its own. So Ravina Amar Mehacha. Ravina says, you know what? Maybe I'll give you a different source. Now this is a pasuk in Yechezkel, and the pasuk says, "Parei pishtim yeyu al rosham." It's referring to the garments of the Kohanim, and it says linen turbans shall be on their heads. Umichnesei pishtim yeyu al masnehen, and they have linen trousers are on their as pants. The lo yakaru bayaza, and they should not gird themselves bayaza. Now we'll figure out what that last phrase means in just a moment. But the bottom line is that we see that these are the Kohan, the big day Kuhuna, and the big day Kuhuna need to be made out of linen because it says Pishtim. So Amar le Rav Ashi le Ravina. Rav Ashi asks a question. V'ha'ad da'asa Yechezkel minalan. Well, 1 second. What about until Yechezkel came? How did you know what the garments were made out of? Ulatameg. 1 second. No, the response. Ravina responds back. Hada Amar Rav Chisda. 1 second. According to what you're saying, what about Rav Chisda's statement? Davar zeh mitoras Moshe Rabbeinu lo lamanu. That he said with respect to the fact that a Kohen who's uncircumcised for any reason can't do the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash, and that we learned it based on something that Moshe taught us. Midivrei Yechezkel ben Buzi lamanu, and we learned it again from the words of Yechezkel ben Buzi. Kol ben nechar arel lev ve'erel basar lo yavo el mikdashi. That anybody who's a stranger, who's uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, shall come into my temple. No, meaning shall not come into my temple. No stranger shall come into my temple. So the point is that this shows that you cannot have somebody who's a Kohen come and do service in the Beis Hamikdash if they're uncircumcised. So Ad Sheba Yechezkel Minolan. Well, based on what your question is, Rav Ashi, we should say the same thing here. Until Yechezkel came around, how did we know? Ela Gemara Gemirala. No, it's a tradition that we had. V'asiya Chezkel v'asmechei akra, and Yechezkel came and gave it a verse. Hachanami Gemara Gemirala. Here we had a tradition, and then we had a verse. And what my lo yakaru b'yaza? What did that all mean at the very end that you can't gird yourself by yaza? Amrabaye lo yakaragu b'makom shemizian. Don't yaza is related to mizian. Mizian means sweat, and don't gird yourself in a place where you're going to sweat. Kedetanya kishahein chogrin, when they gird themselves. Ein chogrin lamata mimasneihen. You don't gird yourself below the loins. The loins here is defined. Rashi says lamata mimasneihen, second to last line in the Rashi on Yechet Amabet, makom shenikafel v'nofel shuman, the place where your fat begins to fold over and fall, habeten of the stomach, al hakilubosas, on your hips, shakorin anka, that location. So you don't want it. It has to be essentially just above, or just from just below your belly button and up to where opposite your elbows would be, which if it can be a relatively short amount of space. And not above their elbows. Ella, but rather kineged atzile yadeyen. It should be opposite their elbows. Amar of Ashi, Amar le Huna bar Nasan. Huna bar Nasan once told me, Zimnachada hava kamina kame de Izgdar Malka. That one time Huna bar Nasan was standing in front of King Izgdar, and Rashi tells us that was his name and that he was from Persia. The Hava midlay Hemyanai, and he and my belt was a little high. The Tite Niale, and King Izgdar pulled it down a little bit. Amarli, and he said, Mamlechas Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, you're supposed to be a kingdom of Kohanim and a holy nation. And that's what it says, Ksiv B'chu, it says about you. Ki asaya kamei de Amemar, and when Huna bar Nasan then came to Amemar, Amarli, Amemar said to Huna bar Nasan, Ikayem b'chabach, through you was fulfilled by you malachim omunayach, that kings will be your servers, your nurturers. And so as a result, we see that the king actually helped him make him look even better and appropriate. And so we'll pick up here at Tanan Hassam, God willing, tomorrow morning at 7:45. Looking forward. Oops, sorry for not scrolling.
Now, you're saying the king here, there's the king talking? A Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Gadosh?
Yes, the king says that to Huna bar Natan. He says, you're supposed to be looking good. You're supposed to look and dress appropriately. And so this is a lesson for all of us. We always have to look nice and appropriate. And so that's
what the king. The king lowered the belt of Rav Huna. Bar
Of Huna
Natan.
Bar Natan. Exactly. Exactly. And Rav Ashi is telling us that story in the name of Huna Bar Natan. And Amaymar said that through you, through Huna Bar Natan, was fulfilled the concept that the king should be be your
Right.
workers. Of Hayum Malachim Omnayach, that your workers will be the kings. And so anyway, so we should have kings be our workers, and God willing, continue our learning together. Looking forward to continuing
The
to learn.
but people do wear a belt below the abdomen. We're just talking
So
about an
that's where
abdomen.
we
You
wear
mentioned.
our belts. Yes, that absolutely that we certainly wear our belts there. But if in fact we were to be wearing our big day kahuna,
Oh,
then
so that
presumably the belt would not go there. You're
right, the
absolutely
belt
right.
of
It would
the
need to
belt.
go higher up. Now, if in fact you have a fit person, a fit person has more space because they don't have a fold of the tummy. So if you don't have a fold of the tummy, so then when you don't have the fat hanging down, so
That's
then
right.
you don't have the problem of where to put the belt. So
But we
But
know
the
that many of the
the
Kohanim,
garter goes up around the belly button.
yeah, that's what that I gotta see. There's somebody who's now wearing a
Barto,
gartel. I gotta see whether find out where they wear it and whether they use this verse as a basis to figure out exactly where to wear it. It's a
most of
great
them
We were
do
question.
all just
wear it.
wearing garters with our kittel.
That's true. That's a excellent point.
Most
100%.
people, when you see the Hasidim, they do wear it higher. They don't wear it at the hip level.
They wear it around their around the near their belly
Around, yeah,
button.
no, that would this is the source. This would be the source for exactly that. You should cough. I gotta remember to wear it a little higher next year. All right.
Kohanim,
We
however, don't we learn that the
Or
Kohen,
I should need to make what I really need to do is I need to lose weight. So that way there's no question. I have no folds, etc. And that's a story.
don't we learn that
but
the
we, but
Kohanim were
we had
often very
Simchas Torah,
heavy?
we had Rosh Hashanah, we had Yom Kippur.
Don't we learn that the Kohanim were often very heavy and fat? They ate a lot of meat, right?
Well, they did eat a lot of meat, and yeah, I mean, there are a couple of stories about Kohanim that are a little heavy. Yes, I
And
think
then there
we
were some
had. Yeah.
there were some of them there were stories where they couldn't when they would roll over on their sides and their bellies would be so large. I mean, the Gemara talks about
Yeah,
this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The whole thing about where the two people were standing next to each other, standing face to face, and
Right.
people were walking underneath their bellies or
Exactly.
something along that,
Right.
because their bellies were so big. So yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. That definitely. I think that's a story about Kohanim. So, all right, Yeshikoach. Looking forward to continuing our learning.
Thank you.